I never thought a Thanksgiving dinner could turn into one of the most painful days of my life, but that is exactly what happened. My sister laughed at me in front of everyone for bringing nothing, and at that moment I felt smaller than I had ever felt before. But that was before I called my son, before everything changed, before the laughter turned into silence so heavy it could have cracked the table in two. Please listen to my story and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong, because my sister's cruelty went far beyond teasing. It was meant to break me, and what happened after my phone call broke her instead. The Thanksgiving dinner took place at my sister's home in Richmond, Virginia, a place she loved to brag about. She had bought a large colonial-style house with white columns and tall windows that faced a long driveway lined with trimmed bushes. The house was her pride. It was her trophy. Everything she owned was chosen to show how well she had done in life. From the imported rugs to the expensive wine, everything spoke of money and status. She had always been that way, even when we were kids. She wanted to be the one who had more, who looked better, who was admired. Growing up, we were close enough to share a room, but far apart in spirit. I was the quiet one who liked to read, help Mom cook, and take care of small things around the house. She was the one who always wanted attention. When she got a new dress, she would spin in front of the mirror for hours. When I got good grades, she would say grades did not matter if you did not look good. I learned early to stay in my corner and not compete, but no matter how quiet I stayed, she still found ways to make me feel smaller. As adults, our lives went in different directions. She married a man who owned several car dealerships and moved to Richmond. She stopped calling unless she wanted to show off a vacation photo or a new car. I stayed in a small town nearby, working as a teacher and raising my son alone after my husband passed away. Money was tight, but my life was peaceful. My son grew into a kind, hard-working man, the kind any mother would be proud of. But I never told my sister much about him. She never asked. She only wanted to talk about her children's private schools, their music lessons, and the designer clothes they wore. Every year she insisted on hosting Thanksgiving, and every year I went. I went because our parents were still alive and they wanted the family together. I went because I did not want to be the reason they felt sad on a holiday. I went even though I knew I would be compared, measured, and found lacking. That year, the year everything changed, started like all the others. My sister sent out an email listing what each person should bring. Her list looked like something from a catering company. Every dish had to fit her theme: gold and white, with matching plates and table runners. She assigned me something small and simple, as she always did. But a week before Thanksgiving, I got sick. I caught a terrible cold that left me tired and coughing. My son told me to rest and skip the dinner, but I didn't want to disappoint our parents. I decided I would still go, even if I couldn't cook. I called my sister and told her I might not be able to prepare the pie she had assigned me. She only said she would take care of it. Her tone was flat and cool, and I could already hear her judgment behind the words. I knew she was thinking I was being lazy. On Thanksgiving morning, I got up early, dressed nicely, and drove the hour to her house. The air was crisp, and the trees were still holding on to the last shades of gold and red. I tried to remind myself that it was just a family meal, but the knot in my stomach tightened as I got closer. When I arrived, the driveway was already full of cars. The house was glowing with light, and laughter poured from the open door. Inside, the smell of roasted turkey and sweet potatoes filled the air. My sister's house looked like something from a magazine. Every decoration matched perfectly. Even the napkins had tiny golden leaves on them. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in, trying to shake off my nervousness. My sister greeted me with that kind of smile that does not reach the eyes. She was wearing a gold dress that shimmered under the lights, her hair perfectly styled. She hugged me lightly, then looked at my hands. There was no dish, no bag, nothing. Her smile grew tighter. I told her I wasn't feeling well enough to bake, but that I wanted to be here with everyone. She said it was fine, but I could feel her disapproval. It hung in the air like smoke. The family gathered in the dining room. The table was long, covered in fine china and shining silverware. My parents sat at one end, looking proud of their 2 daughters. My sister's husband carved the turkey while her children passed around the side dishes. Everything looked perfect, at least from the outside. But I could already feel the tension building. My sister was watching me. Every time someone complimented a dish, she would make sure to say who brought it. When it came time to serve dessert, she made sure to mention that she had to step up since someone couldn't bring their assigned dish. A few people laughed lightly, thinking it was a harmless joke, but it wasn't harmless to me. I smiled and said nothing. I tried to eat and focus on my parents' stories, but the laughter at the table kept circling back to the same theme. My sister had found her target, and I was it. I had brought nothing. That was her weapon. It started as small jabs. Little comments about how everyone contributes to make the holiday special. Then she started turning to the others, asking what they brought, and when she came to me, she said with mock surprise, "Oh, right, nothing." The word hung there. Nothing. It echoed in my head like a bell. My parents looked uncomfortable. My sister's husband looked down at his plate. Her children laughed because they saw their mother laughing, and they thought it was allowed. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to leave the table and drive home, but I knew that would only give her more to talk about later. So I sat there, swallowing my pride with every bite of food. As dessert was served, my sister leaned back and said something about how it must be nice to show up and enjoy a meal without having to lift a finger. The room went quiet, then filled with polite laughter. My face burned. I felt tears pressing behind my eyes, but I held them back. I had learned long ago that she enjoyed seeing me upset. That was the moment I realized she didn't just want to make a point. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to remind everyone that she was the successful one, the generous one, the center of attention. And I was the one who brought nothing. I stared at my plate, thinking of all the times she had made me feel small. When she showed off her jewelry at Mom's birthday. When she made fun of my old car. When she said teaching was a cute little job. All of it rushed back to me like waves. I thought about my son, about how hard he worked, how proud I was of him. He had offered to come, but I told him not to bother. He lived far away now, and I didn't want him to waste his time driving down for a dinner where he wouldn't be welcome. But as my sister laughed again, louder this time, something inside me shifted. I reached into my purse and touched my phone. I thought of calling him. I didn't know exactly what I would say, but I knew I needed to hear his voice. Maybe I just needed to remind myself that I wasn't as small as she made me feel. Before I made that call, though, I looked around the table one more time. I looked at my parents' faces, full of quiet sadness. I looked at my sister's husband, who looked embarrassed but said nothing. I looked at my nieces and nephews, who were laughing because they didn't understand the cruelty behind the words. And then I looked at my sister. Her smile was wide and confident. She thought she had won. I realized that for years I had let her believe she was above me, that her money and her house made her better. But she didn't know my life anymore. She didn't know my son's life. She didn't know what he had become. She thought she knew everything, but she knew nothing. My heart started to calm as I thought about him, My son, the one person who never judged, who never bragged, who worked harder than anyone I had ever known. He had built a life that was his own kind of success, but he didn't talk about it. He didn't need to. He believed that good things spoke for themselves. I decided that maybe it was time to let my sister see just how wrong she was. Maybe it was time for her to learn that bringing nothing didn't mean I had nothing. The dinner was ending. People were moving to the living room, laughing, talking, sipping coffee. My sister stood near the fireplace, surrounded by guests, still holding court like the queen she believed she was. I quietly stepped away from the noise, went into the hallway and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness anymore. It was something else, a calm certainty, a quiet decision forming in my chest. I scrolled to my son's name and looked at it for a long moment. Then with one breath, I pressed the call button. When the phone began to ring, I felt a rush of warmth rise through my chest. I didn't even know what I wanted to say when he answered. I just needed to connect with something kind, something real. I needed to remind myself that love could exist without judgment. The hallway was quiet, only the faint hum of voices coming from the living room. I could smell the faint sweetness of pie and coffee, the scent mixing with polished wood and perfume. I stared at the family photos that lined the wall. My sister's face smiled from almost every frame. It was her house, her story, her pride. I had never seen a single photo of me anywhere. I stood there holding the phone to my ear, listening to the steady rhythm of the rings. With every sound, I remembered all the moments my son had lifted me up when I was ready to fall. When his father died, I thought our lives would crumble. But my son had been only 12 and already so steady. He worked odd jobs as a teenager to help with bills. He studied late into the night because he wanted a better life. He said once that he wanted to make me proud, but I never told him that I already was. When the call went to voicemail, I didn't leave a message. I ended it and stared at my reflection in the glass of a framed picture. My face looked tired, but not weak. I took a deep breath and put the phone back in my purse. I told myself that even if he didn't answer, I had already found what I needed, a reminder of who I really was. But then I felt the phone vibrate in my hand. He was calling back. I stepped into the small side room near the kitchen, away from everyone. The hum of laughter and dishes clinking in the background faded. The quiet felt like a blanket. I pressed the phone to my ear, and as I listened to his voice, the heaviness in my chest loosened. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was fine. I told him I was at the dinner. I told him everything was the same. He didn't need to know about the laughter or the looks. I didn't want to ruin his day. But somehow, even without words, he could always sense when something was wrong. I felt him pause, as if waiting for me to say more. In that pause, I realized how much I wanted to protect him from this family tension, but I also knew he would not let anyone hurt me without reason. He had a strength that didn't need to be shown off. He built his life quietly, but with power that came from hard work and intelligence. I didn't know every detail of what he did. He had explained his projects to me once, but most of it was beyond my understanding. I only knew he managed people, led teams, traveled often, and was respected wherever he went. I told him I loved him. That was all. He said he loved me too, and that was enough. When I hung up, I felt lighter, steadier. But the noise from the living room reached me again, and that calm began to fade. I could hear my sister's voice carrying over the others, louder, sharper. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't have to. The tone said, enough. I knew she was still talking about me. I knew my absence from the circle was being used as more proof that I didn't belong. I walked back toward the doorway and saw her standing near the fireplace, surrounded by relatives. Her golden dress shimmered under the light, and she was gesturing grandly, as if retelling a story that everyone should find amusing. Some smiled politely, others just looked uncomfortable. I could see my mother's hand resting on the armrest of her chair, her fingers tapping nervously. My father looked down at his coffee. It was a familiar sight. The quiet tension that always followed my sister's attempts to prove she was superior. For a moment, I thought about leaving. I imagined walking out the front door, getting in my car, and driving home to silence. But something in me refused to move. I was tired of being the one who left quietly so that she could keep her throne. I stayed because I knew something she didn't. My son was not far. He had mentioned earlier in the week that he might drive down from Washington, D.C. to visit some friends over the weekend. Richmond was only 2 hours away. Maybe he would come. Maybe, for once, the universe would let my sister see who she was laughing at. The laughter from the living room grew louder again. My sister clapped her hands, calling everyone to gather around for a group photo. I joined reluctantly, standing at the edge of the frame, as always. She positioned herself in the center, her husband's arm around her waist, her children beside her. The flash went off, and in that moment she looked triumphant. It was a picture of her perfect world. I wondered if she would even notice later that I was standing there, slightly out of focus, half shadowed by the tall vase on the table. When the photo was done, she announced that she wanted everyone to see her new dining set, imported from Italy. She talked about how expensive it was, how the craftsman had taken months to carve the patterns. She loved talking about things that cost money. I looked around at the family members, nodding politely, pretending to be impressed. No one dared interrupt her. As she spoke, I caught my mother's eyes. For a second, I saw something like apology in her face. She had always struggled with how different we were. She loved both of us, but never found the right way to stop the competition. She once told me that my sister's pride came from insecurity, but that never made it hurt less. The rest of the evening dragged on with the same rhythm. My sister boasting, people listening. The room echoing with the kind of laughter that sounds cheerful but feels empty. I kept thinking of my phone, sitting quietly in my purse. I wondered if my son might call again. The thought kept me grounded. After a while, guests began to move toward the door. My sister handed out gift bags. Yes, she had even prepared those. Each one had her initials printed on it. When she reached me, she hesitated for a second, then handed me the smallest bag. I took it, said thank you, and smiled. The smile surprised her. Maybe she expected me to look hurt, but I felt something shift deep inside me. I was done feeling small. When I finally stepped outside into the cold night air, I inhaled deeply. The stars above the dark Virginia sky looked bright and sharp. The laughter from the house faded behind me. I reached my car, sat down, and turned on the heater. My phone buzzed again. It was a message from my son. He said he was already on his way down. He had left right after our call. He told me not to worry about anything, that he just wanted to stop by. I read the message 3 times. Then I looked back at the glowing windows of my sister's house. For a long moment I considered driving away. But then I thought about how many years she had spent making me feel like I brought nothing. Maybe it was time for her to understand what nothing really meant. I turned off the engine and sat in the quiet. The streetlights reflected off the hood of the car. Somewhere inside the house, I could still hear faint music. I thought of my son's words. His voice always carried calm certainty. Whatever he planned, I trusted him. He had a way of handling things that I didn't need to question. So I waited. I watched the long driveway stretch into the night. I saw the faint headlights in the distance, growing brighter, moving closer. The gravel crunched softly as a sleek black car turned into the drive. It wasn't a car I recognized. It was larger, cleaner, far more impressive than anything I had ever seen him drive before. My heart began to pound, not with fear, but with something else. Pride. I stayed seated as the car came to a stop near the front steps. The engine went silent, and for a moment, everything was still. Then I saw him step out. He looked taller than I remembered, dressed neatly, moving with quiet confidence. The porch lights caught the edge of his smile, and I felt tears sting my eyes again. But these were different tears. They were full of love, pride, and relief. He glanced toward the house and then toward me. I nodded once. I didn't need to say anything. He understood. He always did. Inside, I could hear the front door opening again, voices lifting in surprise as guests realized someone new had arrived. My sister's voice rose above the rest, curious but uncertain. I stayed outside for a moment longer, breathing in the cold air, knowing that everything was about to change. I had walked into that dinner feeling like nothing, but as I watched my son walk up those steps, I knew that nothing was about to mean something my sister would never forget. And that was how the stage was set for the moment that would undo years of quiet humiliation, the moment that would turn her laughter into silence and make her see what she could not see before. The sound of the front door opening reached me before I could gather my thoughts. Inside, I could hear footsteps, the shuffle of surprise, the uncertain tone of voices trying to understand who had just arrived. I walked slowly back toward the porch, keeping my eyes on my son as he stood tall beneath the golden lights. He looked calm, almost serene, like someone who knew exactly what he was walking into. His presence alone shifted the air around the house. The evening had been filled with laughter that cut like knives, but now the laughter was gone. The house had fallen into a quiet hum of curiosity. I stepped inside, and the warmth hit me again, thick with the scent of roasted food and perfume. My sister stood near the fireplace, her golden dress gleaming. When she saw my son standing behind me, her smile froze. She knew who he was, of course. She had met him years ago when he was just a teenager. Back then, he had been shy, polite, easy to overlook. But the man standing there now was different. He carried himself with an easy confidence that demanded attention without asking for it. The family began to gather closer, drawn by curiosity. My sister's husband extended a polite greeting, but I could sense the undercurrent of confusion. No one expected him. My sister, still trying to keep control, welcomed him with the same practiced warmth she used on guests she didn't care about. She asked why he was there, though her voice carried a strange tightness, like she didn't want the answer. He smiled in a quiet way, the kind that said he didn't need to explain himself. I could feel every pair of eyes flicking between them, between my son, who stood with quiet power, and my sister, whose world depended on being the center of attention. The balance had shifted, even if no one fully understood why yet. I stood near the edge of the room, watching it unfold. My son began greeting people, shaking hands, thanking them for inviting him, even though he hadn't been invited. His tone was warm but controlled. He made everyone feel acknowledged. I could see people straightening their posture around him, their expressions changing from polite interest to genuine respect. Something about him commanded it. My sister, sensing this, tried to redirect the attention back to herself. She mentioned her house again, the renovations, the imported furniture. She poured herself another glass of wine and talked louder, but her voice couldn't pull focus anymore. The room had turned toward him like plants toward sunlight. He moved through the space easily, asking questions about everyone's work, their lives, their plans. Even though I had asked him not to talk about his own career much, people started asking. At first, he gave vague answers, but curiosity spread quickly. A cousin asked where he was living now, and when he mentioned Washington, D.C., heads turned. Another relative asked about his work, and he hesitated before answering. Then, with a simple, modest tone, he mentioned that he was managing a major development project for one of the largest firms in the region. I saw my sister's eyes narrow slightly. She didn't say anything, but I could feel the shift inside her. She didn't like being outshined, especially not by someone she had once dismissed as unremarkable. I could almost see her mind working, searching for a way to regain control. She started asking questions that were meant to sound polite but carried an edge. Questions that hinted at disbelief. Questions that tried to make him small again, but he didn't take the bait. He answered calmly, simply, never defensive. The more she tried to trip him up, the more composed he became. The rest of the family began to notice the tension. Some looked uncomfortable, others fascinated. My father, who had stayed quiet most of the evening, leaned forward slightly, his eyes bright with pride. My mother smiled faintly. For years they had seen me treated as less, and now, before their eyes, something was balancing. My sister finally excused herself under the pretense of checking something in the kitchen, but I knew what she was really doing. She was regrouping. She was trying to find a way to spin the situation back in her favor. Her whole life had been built on appearances, and my son's unexpected arrival was cracking the surface of that illusion. In the kitchen, I could hear her moving quickly, opening cabinets, shifting plates. Her husband followed her quietly, whispering something I couldn't hear. My son noticed too, but stayed where he was, talking to my parents about how grateful he was for everything they had taught me and how it shaped him. The words made my throat tighten. For the first time that night, I felt seen, not as a failure, not as the sister who brought nothing, but as a mother who had done something right. When my sister returned, her expression was bright again, but her eyes told a different story. She announced that she had a special dessert surprise. The family followed her to the dining room, where she uncovered a cake that looked like something from a bakery window. It was perfect, layered with gold flakes and sugar decorations. She said she had ordered it from the best bakery in Richmond. Everyone clapped politely, but the glow of admiration didn't return. The attention she wanted had already shifted. Then something unexpected happened. My son's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it and excused himself for a moment. He stepped outside to take the call. I followed him quietly, wanting to make sure everything was all right. I found him standing on the porch, talking softly into the phone, the cold air turning his breath into mist. When he hung up, he looked at me and smiled. He said that the call was from his office. They had just finished closing a deal that would be announced publicly in the morning. It was a major project, one that would make headlines in the state. He said it was the company's biggest success yet, and that he was one of the lead directors. I stood there speechless for a moment. The world around me seemed to slow. All those years of sacrifice, of doing without, of feeling less, had led to this quiet moment on a porch in Virginia. My son had become someone whose name would soon appear in the news. And my sister, who had built her life around social standing, had no idea. He asked if I was okay. I nodded, even though my heart was racing. He didn't need to say anything more. He turned and went back inside, calm as ever, carrying the quiet weight of his accomplishment like a crown no one could see yet. When we returned, my sister tried again to pull attention back to herself. She started talking about her husband's business and how they had just opened another dealership. She emphasized numbers, names, brands, but the rhythm of the room had changed. Her words fell flat. My son sat beside my parents, listening with a gentle smile, but his calm presence made her seem almost frantic. Then, as if fate wanted to push things further, one of the younger cousins, who was always on his phone, suddenly gasped. He held up his screen and said he had just seen an online article about a new multi-million-dollar development project approved by the city of Washington. The headline mentioned the company name, my son's company. A photo showed a group of executives standing at the groundbreaking ceremony, and there, in the center of the photo, was my son. The room fell silent. The cousin scrolled through the article, reading small details aloud. My sister froze. Her glass was halfway to her lips, but she didn't drink. Her face changed slowly, like someone realizing a truth they didn't want to face. Her husband leaned forward to look. My parents exchanged glances of pure pride. The rest of the family murmured in surprise and admiration. The same people who had watched her laugh at me earlier now turned their attention to the quiet, modest man she had once dismissed. My son didn't gloat. He didn't even comment. He simply smiled and thanked them for their kind words. The calm way he handled it made it even more powerful. My sister's smile returned, but it was shaky. She tried to act as though she had always known, saying something about how proud she was of her nephew, but everyone in the room could see the truth. Her tone had changed. Her confidence was gone. Her laughter, which had filled the house earlier, had vanished. I stood beside my parents, feeling the air grow lighter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt like everything I had endured, the quiet mockery, the comparisons, the years of being seen as the one who brought nothing, had led to this moment of quiet justice. My sister tried to regain control again by offering coffee, but no one moved. Everyone was still caught in the aftershock of the revelation. Even her children were whispering to each other, looking at my son with admiration. The tables had turned completely. Now this is where I did something. I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong. I walked over to my sister, who stood still by the dessert table, clutching her glass of wine like a lifeline. I thanked her for hosting such a lovely dinner. My voice was calm, gentle, and clear. Then I told her that I was glad I had come, even if I hadn't brought anything, because it turned out I had brought something far more meaningful. The silence that followed was absolute. Her eyes flickered with confusion and shame. She knew exactly what I meant. The words left my mouth so quietly that for a second I was not sure anyone had heard them, but the stillness in the room told me they had. My sister's face stiffened, her smile trembling at the edges. She looked at me as if trying to decide whether to laugh again or stay silent. Around us, the family waited. Everyone understood the meaning hidden in those few simple words. I had brought something far more meaningful than food or gifts. I had brought the truth about who we really were. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. For years, she had controlled every family gathering with her laughter and pride. Now the power slipped away, one grain at a time, like sand through open fingers. My son stood quietly beside my parents, listening as our cousins began asking him questions. They wanted to know more about the project, about the company, about how he had done it. He answered each question kindly and without showing off. The calm in his tone only made him seem stronger. I could feel the heat of my sister's stare burning across the room. She was trying to find her footing again, but the more she tried, the more awkward it became. Her husband's face was pale. He reached for her glass, setting it down before it tipped. Their children had stopped laughing. They were whispering to each other, glancing between their mother and my son. The shift in the room was complete. The woman who had spent her life shining the brightest now stood in a shadow she could not escape. I stayed where I was, letting the silence do the work. I did not need to add anything. Years of swallowed words were speaking for me now. Every time she had called me lazy, every time she had mocked my small house or my worn clothes, every time she had said I brought nothing, each of those moments echoed back at her in that quiet room. She finally forced a laugh. It sounded thin, almost brittle. She said something about being proud of her nephew's success, but her voice wavered. Pride was not what lived in her eyes. It was something smaller, meaner, fear, maybe, or shame. She turned to the dessert table again, pretending to arrange plates that were already perfect. No one helped her. The family stayed with my son, listening as he spoke about how much he admired his grandmother's cooking and how her kindness had shaped the way he treated people at work. The compliment drew soft smiles from everyone except my sister. It reminded everyone of what she lacked. After a few minutes, I saw her step aside and reach for her phone. She turned away from the group, her shoulders stiff. I knew that look. She was searching for a way to change the story, to reclaim control. Maybe she was calling a friend to brag before the embarrassment reached them. Maybe she was pretending to check messages just to look busy. But whatever she did, no one cared anymore. The attention that had once belonged to her was gone. I moved toward my parents. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she reached for mine. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. My father cleared his throat, a small sound that said more than any words could. For years they had watched their daughters drift apart. They had hoped we might find peace, but peace had never been possible while one of us needed to stand above the other. Tonight that old balance finally ended. The minutes passed slowly. People began to gather their coats, still talking about my son's work. Someone asked if they could see the article again. Another cousin mentioned that the company's expansion might even reach Richmond soon. Each new comment made my sister's silence heavier. She had built her whole image around being the most successful member of the family. Now she stood beside her glittering table, invisible. I thought about walking over to comfort her, but I stopped myself. Compassion is a kind thing, but sometimes people need to sit with the truth before they can hear kindness. If I had gone to her then, she would have turned my words into pity, and pity would have made her anger grow. So I stayed still. Then something unexpected happened. My son excused himself for a moment and walked to the door. When he returned, he was carrying 2 large boxes from his car. He placed them on the table near the entryway. Everyone turned to look. He opened the first box and began handing out small envelopes. He said he had brought something for the family, a gesture of thanks for all the love they had given his mother over the years. The envelopes contained invitations to a community event his company was sponsoring in Richmond the following month, an event that would fund new scholarships for local students. He said he had named the scholarship after his grandmother, my mother, in honor of her kindness and strength. My mother gasped softly, covering her mouth. My father blinked hard, his eyes glistening. The family broke into applause. The second box held beautifully wrapped gifts, simple, thoughtful things for each child in the family. Books, puzzles, and handmade crafts from the local artisans his company supported. The children crowded around him, their faces glowing. The adults smiled and thanked him. My sister stood motionless, her face pale under the golden lights. This was the moment her control slipped away completely. The story of the night no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the quiet woman she had mocked and the son she had underestimated. She tried to step forward to say something that might reclaim her authority, but her voice failed. The applause and laughter around her swallowed every attempt. I could see her hands shaking as she reached for her wine again. The proud tilt of her chin was gone. I looked at her and felt a strange mix of sadness and release. I didn't hate her. I never had. I only wanted her to understand that kindness mattered more than wealth, that love built more than pride ever could. But life had chosen this lesson for her, and it was unfolding right in front of everyone. As people began to hug my son and thank him, she quietly slipped away toward the kitchen. I followed at a distance. She stood at the sink, staring out the window into the dark yard. The reflection of the party lights shimmered on the glass. Her back was straight, but her shoulders trembled slightly. She wasn't crying, not yet, but I knew the tears were close. For a long moment, I simply watched her. Then I turned and walked back to the living room. The laughter there was warm now, not cruel. It filled the space that her sharp words had once owned. I sat down beside my parents again and watched the family move around my son. It was strange how quickly the mood had changed. Only an hour earlier, every look had been weighed with comparison and judgment. Now the air was full of gentle laughter, the kind that comes when people are truly happy. I could hear my son answering questions about the event, explaining how the scholarships would help students who had no money for college. Every word seemed to wash away a piece of the bitterness that had filled this house for so many years. My sister stayed in the kitchen for a long time. The only sign of her was the soft clink of a glass being set down, then silence. Her husband went to check on her once, but he returned alone. His face looked pale and thoughtful, as if he had seen something he did not know how to fix. He joined the others quietly and listened to my son without saying much. When she finally came back into the room, her golden dress no longer caught the light. She looked smaller somehow. The family greeted her with polite warmth, but the rhythm of attention had changed forever. She smiled faintly, trying to act as though everything was fine, but I could see the tightness in her jaw. Pride can hold a person upright, even when they are breaking inside. My son walked over to me then and handed me one last envelope. He said it was a personal thank you, though he did not explain further. When I opened it later that night, I would find a small letter inside saying that he had made the first donation in my name, not his, because he said none of his success would exist without me. But for now, I just took the envelope and held it quietly, feeling its weight like a secret promise. As the evening drew on, the family began preparing to leave. They hugged me, thanked my son, and promised to see us soon. The door opened and closed again and again, letting in small breaths of cold night air. My parents left last. My mother touched my cheek, smiling through her tears, and my father pressed my hand before stepping into the dark. Then there were only 4 of us left: my sister, her husband, my son, and me. The house that had felt so loud all day was suddenly quiet. The golden light from the chandelier reflected off the table where half-empty glasses stood in uneven lines. The smell of candles and cooked food mixed with the faint chill drifting from the hallway. My sister stood at the far end of the room, her back half turned. Her husband looked like he wanted to speak, but she gave a small shake of her head. My son waited near the door, ready to drive me home. For a long time, none of us moved. I realized then that this silence was her real punishment. It wasn't the article, the gifts, or the applause. It was the emptiness left when her pride had nowhere else to go. She had always needed to be seen, but now every pair of eyes that mattered had already turned away. I thought again about whether I should speak to her, whether I should offer comfort, but I knew she wasn't ready for comfort yet. Pride needs to bend before it can heal, and hers was still standing stiff and tall, even in defeat. So I turned toward my son and told him it was time to leave. He nodded and picked up my coat from the chair. As I walked past my sister, I felt her eyes on me. There was no anger there anymore, only a tired kind of shock. For once she seemed unsure of who she was. The woman who had mocked me for bringing nothing now stood surrounded by everything she had ever wanted and yet looked empty-handed. We stepped outside into the night. The air was sharp and cool, and the stars stretched wide above the quiet Virginia neighborhood. My son helped me into the car and then got into the driver's seat. For a moment we sat there without speaking. The lights from the house glowed softly behind us, gold fading into distance. I thought of my parents driving home, probably talking about what had just happened, about how strange and sudden it all was. As we drove down the long driveway, I turned to look back one last time. My sister stood at the window, framed by the heavy curtains. She didn't wave. She just stood there, a figure caught between pride and regret. I faced forward again, breathing in the calm that settled over me. For the first time in years, I felt light. The burden of her judgment had slipped away. I had not planned revenge, but life had given it to me all the same, wrapped in quiet justice. On the ride home, the city lights passed by like small, soft stars on the ground. I watched them blur together and thought about the word nothing. For so long she had used it to define me, but I finally understood that nothing was only what people saw when they looked with shallow eyes. When they looked deeper, they saw the things that really mattered. Kindness, patience, love. Those were the things that built everything else. By the time we reached my house, the tension of the night had melted away. My son carried the boxes inside and set them on the kitchen table. I thanked him, though I didn't need to. He understood. He smiled, gave me a gentle hug, and said he would stop by again in the morning before heading back to D.C. After he left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the streetlights shimmer on the wet pavement. The quiet of my little home felt like peace. I thought about how my sister would probably spend the night replaying every moment, trying to rewrite the story in her mind, but no amount of retelling could erase what everyone had seen. Her laughter had been loud, but truth is louder. And tonight, truth had spoken in a voice she could not silence. The next morning came soft and gray. A thin layer of fog hung low over the trees, wrapping the small Virginia street in silence. I woke before the sun was fully up, the way I often did when something heavy had been sitting in my heart. But instead of the usual ache, I felt a strange stillness, like the world had exhaled. I went into the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. The smell filled the house, mixing with the faint sweetness of leftover pie. My table still held traces of the night before. The envelopes my son had handed out, a few plates stacked neatly, and a folded napkin that someone must have forgotten. Everything felt peaceful, and yet there was a hum of change beneath it all. The quiet shift that happens after truth has been spoken out loud. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about my sister. I could picture her in her big, perfect house, pacing across the marble floor, her mind spinning in circles. Pride is heavy when it breaks, and she had carried hers for so long that letting it go must have felt like losing part of herself. I knew she would not call me today. Maybe not tomorrow either. But sooner or later, she would have to face what happened. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made me look up. My son's dark sedan came to a stop near the mailbox. He stepped out carrying 2 paper bags, smiling when he saw me through the window. I opened the door before he could knock. He said he brought breakfast and that he wanted to sit with me for a bit before heading back to Washington. We sat together at the kitchen table, the same one where I had eaten so many lonely meals, while my sister hosted grand parties. He told me how proud he was of how I handled everything last night. I told him that I hadn't really done anything, that the truth had done it for me. He said sometimes that's the hardest thing of all, to let the truth speak when pride wants to shout. As he talked, I felt a deep warmth that no amount of money could ever buy. Watching him, I saw all the good years, the hard work, the lessons learned quietly in small moments. He had grown into a man of grace, not arrogance, and in that grace I found my own peace. After breakfast, we cleaned the kitchen together. It was a small thing, but it reminded me of when he was little, standing on a stool to help me wash dishes after church potlucks. He still hummed the same way he did back then, softly, without even noticing. When he finished drying the last plate, he turned to me with a smile that looked like his father's. He said he would be in touch soon about the next event in Richmond and that he wanted me to come. When he left, the house felt quiet again, but not empty. I stood by the window and watched his car disappear down the road. I thought about everything that had happened, the laughter, the shame, the silence. It all seemed like a lifetime compressed into a single evening. By mid-morning, I had begun sorting through some of the old boxes stacked in my hallway. They were filled with small things from years past, family photos, letters, and holiday cards. I found one from my sister from a long time ago, written before the distance between us had grown so wide. The handwriting was softer then, the words kinder. She had written about how she hoped our children would always be close. I ran my finger over the faded ink and wondered where that version of her had gone. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from one of our cousins who had been at the dinner. She said the family was still talking about last night, about how inspiring my son's story was, and how proud they were of me. She said even my sister's husband had called their mother to say how humbled he felt. Reading that message, I felt something loosen inside me. It wasn't triumph, it was release. For so long, my sister's voice had shaped how the family saw me. Now they were finally seeing for themselves. I decided to go for a walk. The streets were lined with bare trees and quiet yards. The chill brushed against my face, but it felt good, honest and real. As I walked, I thought about the idea of bringing nothing. My sister had laughed because she thought worth could be measured in what a person carried into a room. But I realized that night that the greatest things we bring are invisible: kindness, patience, and love. Those things don't fit in boxes or pans, but they fill a home more completely than anything else. When I came back home, I made myself another cup of coffee and sat by the window. The fog had lifted now, and the light was clear. My phone buzzed again. This time, the name on the screen made my breath catch. It was my sister. For a long time, I just stared at it, not sure whether to answer. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her sit in the silence she had created. But another part of me knew that holding on to bitterness only feeds the very thing that caused the pain. So I answered. Her voice was quiet. She said she wanted to talk sometime soon. Not today, but soon. She said last night had made her think about a lot of things. Then she hung up before I could reply. The call lasted less than a minute, but it said everything it needed to. When I set the phone down, I felt the tears come, slow and soft. They weren't tears of anger or sadness. They were tears of release. For the first time in a long time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, the wall between us could begin to crack. The afternoon passed gently. I cooked a small meal for myself and turned on the radio. A slow song came on, one I remembered from childhood. The words spoke about forgiveness and about learning to see people not for what they have done, but for who they are beneath their mistakes. I let the song play twice, letting its rhythm settle in my chest. Later that evening, I took out a small notebook and began to write. I wrote about the dinner, about the laughter that had cut so deep, about the moment I called my son. I wrote about how he had walked into that room and changed everything without a single cruel word. I wrote until my hand ached because I wanted to remember this feeling of peace, Not prideful victory, but quiet dignity. The next few days passed quietly, the way winter days often do after the noise of a holiday fades. The air outside grew colder, and the leaves that still clung to the trees turned dry and brown. I spent most of my time cleaning the house, reading and watering my small row of plants near the window. Life returned to its soft rhythm, but a new stillness hung in the background, like the pause before a conversation that needed to happen. Each morning I checked my phone, half expecting to see a message from my sister, but none came. Instead, there were notes from cousins and friends who had heard about the dinner. Some wrote about how proud they were of my son and how good it must have felt to see him recognized. Others said they had never realized how deeply my sister's words had hurt me over the years. One message from my aunt stood out most. She wrote that sometimes people who laugh the loudest are the ones most afraid of being unseen. Her words stayed with me all day. By the end of that week, I felt lighter, but I also felt something close to sorrow, not for myself, but for my sister. I began to understand that her cruelty had never really been about me. It had been about fear. Fear that she might one day lose control of the story she told about herself. Fear that love might run out if she wasn't the center of it. That kind of fear eats at a person slowly. Saturday morning brought the first call. When I saw her name again, I hesitated before answering. Her voice was softer this time. She asked how I was, though I could tell she didn't know how to start. I said I was fine. She mentioned that she hadn't slept much since Thanksgiving, that she kept thinking about how things had unfolded. She didn't apologize, not yet, but there was a tremor in her voice that told me the pride was cracking. We talked only for a few minutes, ending with an uncertain promise to meet for coffee soon. After that call, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, just listening to the quiet. Forgiveness is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in slowly, testing the air, waiting to see if the heart is ready to receive it. Mine was trying to be. The next day I went to church. The pastor spoke about grace, not the grand, distant kind, but the kind that lives in everyday actions. He said grace is what allows people to begin again, even after they have broken something precious. His words settled deep inside me. When the service ended, several people came up to congratulate me on my son's success. I thanked them, smiling politely, but my mind was somewhere else. I was thinking about how much harder it is to offer grace when pride has left bruises. That afternoon, as I prepared a simple meal, I decided that if my sister truly wanted to talk, I would listen. Not because she deserved it yet, but because carrying anger would only keep me trapped in the same place she had lived for so long. My mother had always said that bitterness is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to feel sick. I didn't want that for either of us. 3 days later, she called again. This time, she sounded calmer. She said she had been thinking about our parents and how they must have felt watching the two of us at odds for so many years. She said they didn't deserve that tension. I agreed. There was a long pause, and then, very quietly, she said she was sorry, not for the dinner alone, but for all of it, for every time she had made me feel small to make herself feel bigger. Her words trembled, but they were real. I felt my throat tighten. I told her that I forgave her, not because it was easy, but because holding on to the pain would only keep us both frozen. There was a silence on the line, heavy but healing. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. She said she wanted to see me, maybe that weekend, if I was willing. I said yes. When Saturday came, we met at a small cafe halfway between our homes. It was one of those places with mismatched chairs and old pictures on the walls. The smell of coffee and cinnamon filled the air. We sat by the window, and for a moment it felt like we were just two sisters again. before pride and envy had built walls between us. She looked tired but lighter. Her hands were folded on the table, her wedding ring glinting softly in the light. She said the past few days had been hard. Her husband had been quiet. Her children had asked questions she didn't know how to answer. She said she had realized how much of her life had been built on trying to prove something that never needed proof. I listened without judgment. I didn't interrupt or remind her of the things she had said. Sometimes silence is the kindest answer. When she finished, she looked up at me and asked if we could start over. I nodded. We didn't hug right away. We just sat there for a while, sipping coffee and letting the quiet speak for us. As I drove home that afternoon, the winter light stretched long across the road. For the first time in years, I felt that peace wasn't just possible. It was already here, growing slowly like the first green shoot after a hard frost. That night, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from my son. He said he had spoken to my sister's oldest child earlier that day, helping with a school project. He said they had talked about kindness and leadership, and the young one had said they wanted to be more like him when they grew up. Reading that, I smiled through tears. The next generation was already learning the lesson their parents had struggled to see. The circle was closing. The pain that had begun with laughter and shame was turning into something better, something that might heal the family for good. Winter deepened slowly, and with it came a new calm. The weeks after that meeting with my sister moved gently, marked by small, ordinary things that somehow felt extraordinary now. A shared text, a family photo sent to me, a short call just to ask how I was doing. Each tiny gesture built a bridge, one plank at a time, over the long divide we had lived with for so many years. December brought the smell of pine and the sound of holiday songs drifting through stores and homes. Every year before, those songs had made me feel hollow. They had reminded me of how distant my family felt, even when we were sitting around the same table. But that year, the music felt different. It carried a kind of hope I hadn't allowed myself to believe in for a long time. One afternoon, I got a card in the mail. It was from my sister. On the front was a picture of a snow-covered path lined with trees, the kind that looks endless but calm. Inside, she had written only one sentence. "Thank you for letting me find my way back." I read it twice, maybe 3 times, then set it on the table beside my coffee mug. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Christmas came quietly. My parents decided to host this time, keeping things small and simple. There was no grand table, no long list of guests, just family. The same people who had sat in tension for years now gathered with something softer between them. My sister arrived early, her hands full of gifts, her voice careful but kind. She hugged our mother first, then our father, then turned to me. The embrace was brief but real. I felt her shoulders tremble slightly, and I knew she was still carrying the weight of shame, but at least she was facing it. Throughout the evening she laughed, though the laughter was gentler now. She complimented my son's work when our parents brought it up, and she didn't try to steer the conversation back to herself. For the first time, she seemed content just to be part of the room instead of the center of it. Watching her, I realized how powerful humility could be. It made her human again. When dinner ended, my son stood to make a short toast. He spoke about gratitude and how family can be the hardest lesson, but also the most important one. He thanked his grandmother for teaching kindness, his grandfather for teaching patience, and then he thanked his aunt, my sister, for showing that even pride can turn into wisdom when it's faced with courage. My sister lowered her head, tears glimmering in her eyes. The room went quiet, and in that silence, forgiveness felt like something you could touch. Later, when most of the dishes were cleared and people had begun to gather their coats, My sister and I stepped outside together. The air was cold enough to bite at our cheeks, and our breath came out in soft clouds. She said she still felt ashamed for how she had treated me all those years. I told her that shame loses its power when it's met with honesty. She nodded, looking at the stars, and whispered that she would spend the rest of her life trying to be better. I believed her. When I went home that night, I sat by the window with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. Snow had begun to fall, soft and slow, covering the world in quiet white. I thought about everything that had happened since that Thanksgiving night. It was strange how one evening, one cruel laugh, and one simple phone call could change the course of a family's story. For so long, I had believed that my life was small because I didn't have the same things that my sister had: her big house, her expensive car, her glittering table. But I had learned that night that the real measure of a person isn't what they bring to a dinner. It's what they bring to the people sitting around it. My son had brought kindness. I had brought patience. My sister, in her own way, had brought a lesson we all needed to learn. Months later, when spring arrived and the trees began to bloom again, my sister invited me to her house. It was the first time in years that I accepted. The visit was simple. We drank tea, looked through old photo albums, and even laughed about some of the silly things we used to fight over. There was still distance, yes, but it was no longer sharp. It was soft, like a scar that has healed but still remembers where it came from. Looking back, I realized that what happened at Thanksgiving was not just about revenge or justice. It was about truth. It was about showing that sometimes silence can hold more power than anger. When I called my son that night, I hadn't known exactly what would happen. I just knew I was done shrinking to make someone else feel big. And somehow, that simple act of standing tall invited the world to balance itself again. Every year now, when Thanksgiving comes, our family gathers without the old tension. The food tastes better, the laughter feels warmer, and the air carries gratitude instead of comparison. My sister still hosts sometimes, but she has changed. She calls me weeks in advance to ask what I'd like to bring, and she means it now. Sometimes I bring a homemade pie. Sometimes I bring a bouquet of flowers from my garden. And sometimes when I don't bring anything at all, she smiles and says that my presence is enough. That's when I know the story has come full circle. The pain of that night is no longer something I hide from. It's something I hold gently because it reminds me that growth often begins in discomfort. Without it, we might never learn the true weight of kindness or the quiet power of respect. So when I tell this story, I tell it not as a tale of humiliation or revenge, but as one of redemption. I learned that love, once wounded, can heal. I learned that forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it reshapes it. And I learned that sometimes the greatest gifts we bring to the table are invisible but unforgettable. Please tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong to let my sister's humiliation stand that night, because this decision didn't just end her honeymoon with pride, it changed the shape of our family forever. It taught us that the smallest act of quiet strength can rewrite years of cruelty, and it made me wonder whether forgiveness, even when it comes late, can still set people free.